Hello and welcome to episode 28 of the Wilder podcast. In this interview with Simon Roper, we debate the problems and possibilities of technology in rewilding, covering everything from the latest innovations to whether technology ever could or should replace boots on the ground.
I like that military reference there, boots on the ground. I think that's a good word. Did you do that knowingly, or is that just your...
I think this is rubbing off on me, Tom. It's quite concerning.
I'm getting into your psyche now.
Yeah.
I like it. Well, welcome, listeners. Really do appreciate you being here. If you're new to the Wilder podcast, I'm Tom, and my wife here is Chloe.
Good evening.
And just a quick overview. We started this journey 28 episodes ago, about 18 months ago-ish.
That's correct.
What you wouldn't have heard is off air, we just had about a 5-minute debate as to whether or not I was right, but I was, so we're going to move on. And we didn't know anything at that point. We just knew that climate change, biodiversity loss was something that we have researched and was important, and we felt that we should do everything in our power to try and have value. We started the Wilder podcast to document our journey as we are rewilding the Grange project with 80 acres in rural Monmouthshire. And hopefully, as we educate ourselves, you're joining us for the journey and we speak to some amazing guests, including this week's interview as well. However, hold your horses, Chloe. So what we normally do at the top of the podcast is give a very short update as to some of the events that have happened on the project. Over to you, Chloe.
So a pretty significant event on the project, which has quite dramatically changed the feel of the place, has been a loss of another nearly ancient oak.
Yeah, and that was very much out of the blue, a very still evening or night. And then Shona was one of our volunteers who was staying in one of our cabins. I heard a crack, a very loud thunder crack at 2 o'clock in the morning. And anyway, big chunk of the tree had come down and has started its defielding process a little bit early. And we thought that was the end of the journey, but the next day, yet another quarter of the tree crack, thud onto the ground, and now we've got half of this almost ancient oak defielded on the land, which is really sad because it was beautiful. However, as we've learned, and as we learned with the first oak that fell recently, the biodiversity only gets better when massive oak trees start to decompose and provide homes to a whole host of different animals.
It's like every time we mention it on social media or in the community, someone gives another fact about how a dead oak provides more habitat and in some ways more life than an alive oak, which it's sad from a visual impact because obviously you could see that tree and celebrate it in its glory. But, you know, it's really unusual to see that sort of dead wood in a really exposed way in a field. So hopefully it'll be an opportunity for visitors to the project to really have an experience of what it's like to watch a tree essentially over many years, I'm going to imagine, decompose in front of you.
Yeah, and that's the difference between what we're doing and a farmer. Again, not throwing shade, they need their fields to produce their produce. However, they would have gone up there, got the chainsaw out, cleared it out of the way as quickly as possible, whereas we're going to leave it to do its thing, provide all of those habitats. The leading theory as to why it came down is that it's called black rot, was I think, again, don't quote me on this. This is just someone on Instagram messaged me saying it. But the theory says that the water pooled over time inside a crack in the core of the tree, and over decades and decades, it's rotted away from the inside out. And then eventually the pressure became too much and it dropped, which I think sounds logical to me.
It does. And it actually makes it all the more special when you're walking around the project now and you see all the baby oaks as well, starting their journey to life. And they're of varying size from 2 inches up to, nearly 6 foot. So it's nice to recognise the kind of succession of nature and how, although we might have lost one, there are many others trying to fill in the gaps with time.
With time, yeah. In the show notes, there's links to our social media, and on there somewhere there will be pictures of the tree if you are so interested. Go on and Chloe, hit me with the next update.
So it's a feathered update next, and the owls have really been making their presence known over the last few weeks.
Yeah, and it's been an absolute joy. For various reasons to do with babies, we haven't been able to go into the cabin and spend a night there. So long story short, I ended up spending one night there with each one of our elder children. And we were just sitting on the decking and, Rose was 5 years old. And we just saw a pair of barn owls swooping across the fields and hunting, doing it's called sectoring, which is where it breaks down the field and looks for...
Look at you with your bird knowledge.
That's Ranger Jerry. So that was really special. And since then, working with Shona, we've now found there are 2 nesting pairs of barn owls on the land, which is wonderful, although screeching baby barn owls is terrifying if you're not expecting it at night time, just saying.
Or Shona in the cabin with the screeching.
And me. Yeah, when I was walking past them. And we've got tawnies as well, so it's wonderful. And quite literally, when we were recording this episode, looking out of the window, I can see bats, and then I just saw a beautiful barn owl fly past. So it is really special right now with our feathered friends.
I think my favourite moment of today was when a little video popped up on my WhatsApp, and it was a barn owl having a bath in the pig wallow, which Shona had sent through from the trail cam. It's just such a lovely thing to see.
And not to give myself, credit here, but I dug that wallow myself where I thought it would be a good location for a wallow. And it has turned into be a good location, not only for the pigs, but we've had deer there. We've had a weird little swimming volley thing that swam across it. We don't know what it was. Loads of birds. And not only that, the crown and the jewel. The jewel and the crown was this beautiful but large barn owl going in for its ablutions. Right. Promise last one, and then we will get into the fascinating, at least for me, because I'm a tech geek and I love this chat. Go on then, Chloe, give us the update.
So this is a pre-warning that the next episode in the Wilder podcast is going to be a slightly different format. And that's because we have lots of exciting updates to share with you around the future direction of the project and what we're hoping to achieve. And those updates started really this week with breaking the ground on our education centre.
Yeah, and it's not as simple as you just made it sound. There's been a lot of stress, and there's probably going to be quite a lot of stress over the next few weeks to get everything going as smoothly as we can. Again,
it's partly why this episode is a bit late, so sorry about that.
So tune in for our next episode, and we are looking to try and do episodes like that every 6 months or so for people that maybe haven't had or don't have the time to go back over 28 episodes of back catalogue of the Wilder podcast, but really do want to get up to speed. So this is going to be an update episode to take you from the start to where we are now, plans of what we're going to do and thoughts for the future. So we won't have a guest, but hopefully it'll be quite interesting to the hardcore Wildonians.
I'm not sure.
Got to give your listeners a name. That's how you go viral.
If anyone has a better name than Wildonians, please let us know.
Okay, would you like to introduce this week's guest?
I would love to. So we were very excited to be joined by Simon Roper from Ambios. And this is a fascinating insight into the world of rewilding and technology, but also a lot about people and their role in this process as well. Hi, Simon, and welcome to the Wilder podcast.
Hi, Chloe. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Oh, we're equally as excited. It's our absolute pleasure. To give some context for the conversation today, I'm wondering whether you could introduce yourself and the organisation of which you're Director of Ambios.
Yes, so my name's Simon Roper, and I've been involved in nature conservation, nature recovery for the whole of my career. Started off working many, many years ago, Devon Wildlife Trust, County Wildlife Trust, and formed Ambios probably about 20 years ago to help people who wanted to get jobs working in our sector. So it was set up to provide the skills that people needed. At the time, we noticed that people were getting a lot of knowledge and understanding, mostly from university degrees, but actually the skills base was lacking. So we formed a not-for-profit company, Ambios, and started providing those skills through grant funding mostly, and went from there, basically. And that's what we do to this day. And it's very exciting because we've now gone with the flow and morphed into an organisation that's now, if you like, providing nature recovery training. So a slightly different title. Perhaps we can come back and talk about the nuance around that later. But for now, we're Ambios Limited. We're based down in Devon. We provide residential training and other forms of training courses. We're funded either through people paying for courses or through grant funding where we can find it. We are also rewilding part of the Sharpham Estate in South Devon as well, which is really exciting. So we've actually got, if you like, a playground outside our residential base where people can actually see nature recovery happening, which is really exciting. So that's what we do. And I'm a fellow director with a bunch of others running that company.
There's so many shared connections there, both in terms of the scale of which you're rewilding, which is very similar to here at the Grange Project, and also your passion for education. And I love that phrase, this idea of a playground, of sort of testing out ideas, because I think that's a really similar ethos to what we're trying to achieve here. And I guess when we had our intro chat, which we always do when we meet with the podcast guest to think a bit about what the theme of the conversation would be, it was when we started stepping into the role of technology rewilding that Tom's ears in particular pricked up. And,
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's got a passion for software connected to many years of slaying orcs in a dark bedroom as a teenager.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
yep.
But I suppose I'm interested, given that's kind of the theme of our conversation, thinking about the role of technology. What's inspired your interest in technology generally?
I guess a similar sort of thing. Not quite orcs online. Just always been interested in technology, and Ambios therefore always interested in technology and how it's used in our sector. And I think it just comes from that way back teenage interest in technology, as well as, other things, nature. And as an organisation, we've always been interested in those three things, really. So nature, learning, and technology. And how do they come together in nature conservation? Really interesting, because initially you think, okay, how do they come together? But actually, there are loads of examples of technology in our sector, and increasingly so. If we think about things like camera traps, remote camera traps. In the old days, you put lots and lots of batteries into a camera trap and you put it out somewhere remotely and you've got foxes and badgers or whatever. These days, with the use of the mobile phone network, you can actually monitor those cameras live to your phone, because that technology has moved in the last, 15 years or so. So there's one example of technology. Of course, there are online platforms, geographic information systems, GIS, GPS, global positioning systems, all of which are playing a role in how we monitor wildlife and how we understand wildlife and how we might predict things into the future. Drone technology is there now as well. And drone technology, of course, recording not only visual imagery, but imagery into the infrared, or imagery known as LiDAR, where we can look at the landscape in different ways by flying over it. And we've just got a project that's allowing people to imagine the future. So you've got your land, we've got our land. I could come to you, or we could fly a drone over our land, and we could take that into an online space where we could actually say, what if we grew some trees there? What if we made that more scrubby? What if we had water buffalo grazing there? What if we had lynx moving through the landscape? And we can, using AI, we can create that visually, and we can present it back to people. And that's because we're visual animals, aren't we? That's a really intriguing, engaging way to explore the future, because we could have more trees over there, or we could actually decide maybe that's not what we want to do, we'll put them over there. And using this technology, we can do that kind of what-if scenario and allow people to see the future. Another exciting use of technology. But there are lots of different ways that technology is, of course, involved in our lives, and lots of different ways that it's involved in nature conservation. And circling right back, that's what we train at our site in Devon. So when people come and train with us, residentially mostly, then we're talking them through some of this technology. And sometimes, such as in the case with wildlife camera traps, we're lending them the technology to take away and practice in their own space. So take home or take back to university or whatever, and try that. And then let's come back online and look at the results, and let's try and make this process as effective as it can be for everybody. It's easy to put out a camera trap. We could just do that randomly in our garden or in a wild space. How do we become an effective camera trapper? How do we actually make sure that camera is going into a place where we'll get the minimum number of what we call false triggers? So things like, light and space and no action in the frame. How can we actually get those badgers and those foxes? How do we need to read the environment to put the camera in the right place at the right angle to maximize the chance of us getting really, really good images?
That's great. And I think it definitely sets the conditions for this conversation. And there's so many directions that I want to go with this. But I will reflect on the challenge with technology, and it always is. You sometimes have the skeptics, and that's we could talk about how we deal with the skeptics and bring them on board. But we also have the opposite of the evangelists and the people who, it's the shiny thing concept. Then we need to talk about how we manage that, and we don't just jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we scientifically approach these challenges and go, right,
Absolutely.
How does this technology support us? And actually, is the bang worth the buck? So there's lots of things to talk about there, as I've just highlighted. What I think the listeners would really enjoy, and what I would like, is some practical applications of how you're using modern technology right now, so we can kind of create that foundation of understanding where it's being used. So could we go back to maybe Ambios and how, over the time of the organization, you've taken technology and driven that forward and being one of the front runners of using tech in nature conservation?
Really great opportunity, Tom, for me to talk about a couple of projects that spring to mind. Just a little bit of background. I wear 3 hats for Ambios. I'm the technology lead in many senses, certainly in terms of the thinking about projects and things. I'm also a bit of a fundraiser and have been for years, so searching for grant funding. And I'm also involved in the training delivery. So back along, we had a European grant-funded project that enabled us to deliver training to young people who were career changers, who were interested in how we use technology in nature conservation. And this particular example is about the use of GPS units and GIS, okay? So GPS unit, global positioning system, little handheld device, tells me where I am on the surface of the world. And really useful for mapping. So in a job such as a countryside ranger, you might want to map the edge of a woodland. And that might be done over many years. So you could see actually how a woodland might be moving out if it was allowed to undergo natural succession. So all sorts of other things. Where are the gates and stiles? Where's the best patch for my wildflower meadow, whatever. Walking around to those areas using a handheld GPS unit that collects data on where you are on the surface of the world, and then bringing that data into the GIS, so the Geographic Information System, using something called QGIS, which is an open source GIS, which enables us to put that information onto a map on the screen in front of us. And that whole process at the time, we're going back, I think, about 10 years now, that process was really new in our sector. And we accessed some European funding in order to deliver that to a whole bunch of people who were interested in coming into nature conservation sector, to give them those skills. So when they went for an interview, and they were asked about an interview for Countryside Ranger, are you familiar with GPS units? Are you familiar with GIS? The answer would be yes, and I've done this. And for us, it's always about that experience for the trainee. So we're always imagining, how can we help the trainee the best way we can? Put the trainee at the centre of the thinking. Thinking, okay, so if I'm going into an interview to be asked about ranger skills, and the issue of GPS GIS comes up, what can I actually explain in the interview that would be meaningful? Not just that I attended the course or that I've done a theoretical thing, I've actually walked the countryside and I understand that if I walk into a woodland, my GPS unit will become less accurate. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to have to compensate for that. Of course, the technology has moved on enormously, and now people can do all this on their phones. Back in the day, we had to have actually different GPS units. Some people may use them if they're fell runners or walkers or go out orienteering. They may still use separate units. They are slightly more accurate. But these days, of course, it's all now consolidated onto our phones. But that's one example of where we were really at the cutting edge of the use of that technology 7 or 8 years ago. If we come bang up to date, we're now thinking about projects which involve drones, which are taking images, and those drones, of course, now they're linked into the GPS system, so they know where they are in the world. So you can consistently do a flyover of a particular location with looking down on that land, and you can get a visual record of that land year on year. And you can overlay those in a sequence so you can see how the land is changing visually year on year. Programming the drone to do that, flying the drone, dealing with the constraints of very windy days, lots of rain, low battery life, the area of the land that you want to survey. All these things can be part of what we train at Ambios, or give experience to trainees doing.
So just to bring that up, Chloe, the drone I've currently got doesn't let me do the pre-planned flight routes. So I think I should get another one. And Simon, you and I need to have a chat.
Okay.
You can't ambush me on a podcast for another tech purchase. It's not happening.
Seriously, and I think it is not, because drones are super powerful if used well. And I think that some people avoid use of technology because it's scary or complicated, but drones are a great example of where it doesn't have to be a complicated product, and they've designed it to a point where now that it's so user-friendly that it is a pleasure and an enjoyment to use.
That's true. I think it goes back to a point you were making earlier. Is the glossy tech leading us astray? What's the purpose for the drone? And I think it's really important. But I think there can be, and you touched on it earlier, there can be a purpose which is very, if you'd like, practical nature recovery focused. I want to actually map this particular area that may be inaccessible, and a drone is the only way to do that. And I want to understand perhaps some of the species that are there. So if I fly at certain times of year, I can see certain flowers. But there's also another important area, I believe, for drone technology, and that is the visuals, and sharing the visuals to a wider audience, those that might not necessarily be engaging with nature at this time, but actually we can encourage them to engage with nature because we're showing them that visual imagery. And we're either doing that in the film on platforms like YouTube or Vimeo or whatever, or we're actually doing it live, where we're actually doing a live presentation and we're showing behind us the video that we've taken using drones. So the question is, what do we want to use that drone for? And we do have to be a bit careful that the whole sort of piloting of the drone and the flying it is great, and that's another really useful set of skills. But again, it's just that, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? That's the starting point, I suppose, yeah? And then the technology is the tool to achieve it.
Yeah, I completely agree, Simon. And I think there's something, isn't there, about how a picture can say 1,000 words. And when you're looking for telling a story of possible change, or those images can be super important in that process. And just to take it back a little bit, we're at the stage of our project where we're doing lots of baselining in terms of understanding what we currently have on the land, and that's involved a lot of surveys, and it's involved quite a lot of people like out on the ground counting things and looking for butterflies. And I guess I was curious, you mentioned about the role of drones and understanding kind of habitats and assessing that. My understanding is that as part of the biodiversity net gain, which is this, I don't know how to summarize that easily for people, Tom.
I'll slope my shoulders to the expert in the room here, Simon. How would you describe BNG in 10 seconds?
BNG is the perceived increase in biodiversity you get by managing land in a particular way. Measuring that is a whole different story.
And then maybe let's not get too caught up with the intricacies of how we measure BNG, because I think that's probably a whole separate podcast. But I suppose on a simple level, my understanding is that a drone flight of a part of that kind of assessment could make up part of that. And I suppose I wondered about the challenges of that for ecologists who have spent decades training to study the ground, understand what it's telling them, and using that to inform their habitat survey. And actually, can a drone ever really replicate that expertise?
It's a really good question, Clay. We get very rapidly drawn into the detail around BNG. I think I would be cautious about the idea that drones could ever do that, but I'm open to the proposition. And you touch on another really interesting point, which is how does technology complement years of experience? If I may, I go back to talk about camera traps. Camera traps are used as a survey technique for protected species such as badgers. Can we use camera traps to ascertain where badgers are moving around the landscape? And that needs to be done in certain specific circumstances because badgers are a protected species. So we need to know if we're going to take actions that are going to impact badgers, then we need to make sure we do that, with the necessary licenses. Badgers was my entry into nature conservation, 40 years ago now, following badgers around the countryside at night, using actually another technology, using radio telemetry. So they had little radio collars that were put around their necks, and we could follow them using aerials. So badgers is my background. Going back to cameras. The use of cameras actually is not a replacement for field skill. So I'm going to go out on a limb here because I've got grey hair and I've been around in the business for 4 years. I can probably tell you, what's happening with the badgers in a locality by doing some really intensive field work just as easily as putting out camera traps. Okay, wow. Even in my own area of interest and my own area of study over 40 years, I'm still wary about relying on camera traps to tell me information that I could probably pick up if I had enough time just to do the field work and use my eyes and get into the situation. Yeah. So there's an interesting interplay there because it's very easy these days to use cameras and to go out and survey and get the information you need. And it takes you some time to do that. You have to put cameras out, particularly for the case for badgers, you have to watch over time. But I might be able to give you a similar result by just having enough time in the field to look for the signs that I need to discover.
That's really interesting. And as you were speaking then, it made me think about, this is not a leading question, it's just there's apps now that Chloe and I have found so invaluable. And I'm interested to get your reflections on value versus detriment to developing and understanding the natural world. So the apps like the Merlin bird app, we've got the iRecord butterfly, you've got numerous really powerful free tools that help the sick, lame and lazy, maybe, or the people who are new to nature conservation, who haven't built up that knowledge over a number of years or been professionally trained. So I'm keen to get your reflection on the value that those kind of apps bring.
It's a really interesting question, isn't it, Tom? And I think Merlin is a really good example. So we would suggest that these tools are pointers. They're a useful addition. They point you in the right direction. So Merlin app is a really good example. So you can use Merlin to listen out for the bird you're not sure about or to see what's around. But I would never 100% trust it in a survey context. I'm just one of the kind of people that I want to see it for myself, okay?
Yeah.
So I might hear that there's a firecrest because that's what Merlin's telling me. Well, I'd love to see one. I'm really cautious about putting it on that survey list unless I've actually seen it. That's a personal thing.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a really useful addition, and I don't know birdsong very well at all, but if I get it and it says whitethroat, and I'm thinking, right, where is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And actually, I wouldn't then come back and say we've got whitethroat on our land. I'd say Merlin's thrown it up, and it could be. Won't be satisfied until somebody's seen it.
My memory's pretty poor at the best of times, and Chloe will definitely back me up on this. If I think back to the bird that I've now cemented into my thick skull. It's the one where I was shown by the Gwent Ornithological Society as we're walking around the land, and they pointed it out to me. Then the call itself it's a stonechat, which is obviously a very distinctive bird anyway. But now I just know it, and when I hear it, I've now learnt it. And I've been using the Merlin app for a very long time, and I've created lists of 10 birds when I've sat and recorded it. But it's just interesting when I reflect on the one that I've really properly learnt, and is one where actually I've seen it, heard it, and reflected on it.
Really good point. And that's a great way, using them both together is that great way of learning and consolidating, trying to get stuff into long-term memory, which is what we're kind of, in the learning context, what we're trying to do, aren't we? I know I suffer the same way with, long-term memory. Getting it into your memory is a challenge.
And perhaps there's also something there about the value of the relationship. I remember the birds, whenever we have someone that comes out to the site here that's a specialist, which is pretty much everybody because Tom and I know nothing. Whenever we go for a walk with the botany group or the bird group, whatever, I try and come away with 3 facts. And actually what helps me remember those facts is not just taking the picture and having the app to support me, but it's remembering the person that showed me the thing in the moment and kind of locating it both physically and temporally, I guess, in terms of when it occurred. And then in that relationship, remembering, it was so-and-so that showed me this here. And that also supports. And I guess a kind of point on the apps as well. One thing I'm interested in is probably historically, I wouldn't have taken my phone for a walk. I would have just gone to be present in nature, and what would have come from it. Whereas now I do often have my phone, and I often regret it if I don't take it because I'm like, oh, what was this or what was that? And I kind of wonder about that, the role of technology there in terms of interrupting our connection to nature.
Really interesting point, and I'm exactly the same. And also that thinking, I think, is really important. I think we need to understand that. What is the nature of our relationship with the natural world, and how do we clear the space to make that as good as it can be? And so sometimes forgetting your phone or keeping it in your pocket perhaps is the thing to do. And I think it's about just being conscious of that, actually being mindful of that, bringing that into the front of your mind, and going back along perhaps a different technology, the old digital SLR cameras. Many years ago, used to have interchangeable lenses on them. We used to walk around and try and take photos of nature. And, the similar to you, Chloe, the thing that sticks in my mind, actually, is seeing a snowshoe hare in Canada and having the camera, ready to take a photo, and actually having the presence of mind to think, actually, I won't raise my camera at this time. I just want to enjoy seeing this fabulous snowshoe hare that's right in front of me that would make an absolutely fantastic photo, but I'm going to have that as a memory this time.
Yeah.
Right? And that was 30 years ago, right? And I can, as I describe it to you, it's there. Like in front, I can see that image in front of me. I can't share that image with anybody else because I didn't raise the camera. But no matter, it was a magic moment. And that importance of engagement with nature on a personal level is truly and profoundly important. And actually, if we don't put our phones away at that time, we are missing something that is bigger than us. And this is part of the training that we do, is to try and find that space to allow people to have that deeper connection, because it's fundamentally important to all the nature recovery and all the stuff we're doing right now in our sector. Really, really important. We talk about technology and we enthuse about technology, and in the right circumstance, we use that technology, but we also remember that sometimes it's better off left in a box.
I'm really enjoying the well-rounded conversation we're having here, because again, I think this could have gone really heavy into the deep tech, but I think it's important to get that balance of the conversation. As we're moving on to this conversation, we're starting to get towards the latter half of this chat. So I'm quite keen to reflect maybe on one more use of current technology before we start going into the inverted commas blue sky thinking side of technology. So back to you, Simon. Is there any technology that you're particularly excited by, or you think would be really interesting to discuss on this podcast?
Let's have a think. So if we enter the world of learning for a moment, there's some interesting stuff that we're working on. We've just got a project that's been funded by VocTech Trust. So this is really a parallel to what we do in terms of our nature conservation training. So qualifications, getting a certificate that shows that I'm competent to do something is something that we've been involved with for many years. We've had different relationships with that whole process because it's an educational process. And you can receive certificates from awarding bodies that show that you're competent to do things. A classic example would be a chainsaw certificate, where you're awarded a chainsaw certificate and somebody has made an assessment that you're safe and okay to use a chainsaw. And that's applicable in many different areas of conservation, and it could apply to planting a tree. It could give you a certificate for competently planting a tree. But there's a process to go through there, which involves the candidate learning how to do it, practicing how to do it, keep practicing until they feel that they're ready to be assessed, and then an assessor coming along and watching what they do and saying, yeah, okay, I think you're competent. And that goes through the process, you get a certificate. We had an idea that it might be more comfortable for the candidate because it involves somebody else coming along and watching what you're doing. And we just wondered whether a candidate might be more comfortable actually talking through what they do on their own, just in their own time, talking through. Because we've all got phones these days, so they could actually record a description of what they're doing onto a phone. And that led to a conversation around, well, actually, if we could get an artificial intelligence to listen to that recording and actually understand whether or not the person is describing in sufficient detail that the planting of the tree means that they're competent, then we could give them a certificate for it. So we've got a grant to explore that very technology. So the use of artificial intelligence in listening to candidates describe, in this particular example, how to plant a tree. We're going to learn an awful lot from the project. We've no idea whether it's going to work. We're going to be interacting with techie guys that know about artificial intelligence, not my area at all, but we have somebody who's going to work with us on that. And we're going to see where it goes and see whether actually we can make this a more comfortable experience for the candidates and whether or not the AI can actually do what we think it might be able to do. There's a whole load of tech and complicated stuff around that. But, that would allow us to give people a robust certificate for planting a tree, or you could take many other different areas of nature conservation. And then, again, when they go for an interview and they're asked about, have you any experience of planting a tree? They can say, yeah, I planted a tree and I've got a certificate of competence to show that I can do that, just like they would show a chainsaw certificate. So that's a really left field use of technology, but we are exploring it. And I suspect, because my experience of sort of running projects in the past is that there'll be a whole load of other interesting things that will flow out of that, some of which we don't know yet. Very exciting to discover over the next 12 months what happens. And we might see another application in another area of nature conservation. Don't know.
Will it be audio only, or will you also be looking on collecting visual data to support that?
At the moment, it's just audio because we're doing a trial. It's very, very much a proof of concept, and there's a whole load of complications around visual, a whole load of more tech complications. Very exciting, possible in the future. But again, talking to sort of potential candidates, they appeared to me more comfortable doing an audio recording than being filmed, because being filmed was very similar to having an assessor standing next to you and watching. So we went for the audio one. We'll do a proof of concept. Don't know quite where it's going to go, but it's going to be an exciting development.
What I quite like about entrepreneurialism and using tech to try and solve problems is, and I think what you're saying here is, you don't know if it's going to be successful because there's going to be lots of people listening. They'll be pretty skeptical about what you just described. And I'm sitting here and I'm just poking holes in it in my brain as you're saying it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, and doesn't mean it's not going to be successful, because like you said, even if it's not successful, great. That's really good data point, because then what you go to do is go, that wasn't successful for these 5 reasons, but this problem in nature recovery may need this technology because those 5 reasons don't exist in this problem. So that's what people kind of need to rewrite their brain when they're thinking about problem-solving application of technology within any sphere. It's okay to fail. It's great to be successful, but it's okay to fail because that's the only way you learn.
Right, fantastic. Sorry, Tom, just got to come in there because that is absolutely the learning philosophy of Ambios. So the learning environment that we try and create is one where it's absolutely okay to fail at whatever you're doing, whether you're trying to identify a cricket, whether you're trying to plant a tree, whether you're trying to put in a post and rail fence or build a hedgerow. The environment that we create is one where you can absolutely make mistakes. That's absolutely fine, because that, as you so eloquently put it, is the way that we learn. And this is absolutely fundamental to what we do as an organization. It relates to something called growth mindset and solution focus in the educational space, the learning space, but it's so important. And I guess you're absolutely right. I mean, go back to the project I just described, there are lots of what ifs. What if this doesn't work? What if this doesn't work? That's what we're testing. We're going right out on the edge of this technology to see whether it's capable. I mean, I've described, my very limited understanding of the way that the AI works is that you have to convert all your audio, in fact, to text-based because it's text that the AI actually understands. So you've got a step there, and then if the AI is going to respond to you, it's going to respond in text that's then going to be an audio output. So there are many steps. It's a very complicated process. I'm looking forward to working with the technologists on this so that I can understand it a little bit more on the edge of because they have a really deep understanding of it. And who knows what might spin out of it. It's a very high risk project. And it's incredibly brave of the VocTech Trust to fund us for a year to investigate it. And I think, as you just said, they recognise there could be other things that come out of this. It could be really interesting, but who knows?
It's things like, what happens if the people recording don't have phone signal at the time? So, like, where does it store the audio file? What happens if they've got accents?
And there's a really important thing there, actually, Tom, which is about we have discussions with funders a lot about this, which is that our environment is unique, or it's unusual rather, in the sense that we work in remote locations, don't we? Where the signal isn't quite there, where the technology won't quite work, and so we're also pushing that. So in the past, we've done stuff around live transmission, learning, actually doing a live learning presentation onto a closed Facebook group from a remote location on the Sharpham estate where the mobile signal was a bit dodgy. And it was another example actually of where we pushed the technology, but discovered how we could solve the challenges. So there is technology that allows cameras to use the mobile phone network to transmit a live image, and they use multiple carriers to do that. So multiple different people, so that if one signal's weak, they swap to another. And it happens very fast in real time, and that allows the flow of video to be as smooth as possible. We tested it out down at Sharpham to, as I say, a live Facebook group. It took a lot of people. So we had a trainer who was actually being recorded looking for tracks and signs of animals at Sharpham. We had the camera person who was following them doing that. And we had another person who was actually watching the Facebook feed to see that it was going and answering questions as they were coming in live on the Facebook feed to that third person. So that third person is seeing the text coming up as people are asking questions, and then he's asking the presenter, and the presenter is then responding live back to the question. So again, it was another example of the use of technology and pushing it absolutely to the edge.
That's really interesting because it almost kind of connects into the point that's been sitting in my head over the last 5 minutes or so as we've been talking about this trial, which is about a critique that's often offered to technology, I guess more specifically to AI, which is about the impact on people and jobs in particular. And actually, if you've got a phone app that assesses whether someone is safe with a chainsaw, what does that mean for the persons whose job it was to assess how good somebody was with a chainsaw? So I wonder whether you have any reflections on the impact of this stuff on people in terms of employment.
Just going back to that specific example, what we're doing in our project is we're actually moving the assessor who would have been alongside the candidate to a different point in the educational process. So we're moving the assessor to a point where they're actually sampling what the AI is doing. And I need to get a diagram to describe it to you really, but there's a process you have to go through in order to ensure your quality assurance. And we're moving the assessor away from the front line where they're next to the candidate to a different point in the process. So the job is still there and a very important job too, but it's different. And I think this is another general point about technology coming in, is that actually what we find is that people move to different points in the process because technology assists in at this particular location in the workflow, and actually we need people to be somewhere else. I think going back to the broader point about whether technology will ever replace people, which I think maybe is perhaps what you were exploring. Again, I think we're in an interesting environment with nature because actually it is human eyes and ears and senses that we really need to understand nature and to monitor nature. So I think all this technology is complementary to what we do. I don't ever see that there is this sort of holy grail of could it actually replace? Not entirely sure. It gives us interesting new windows into what's going on. Some fascinating stuff around using GPS tags on all sorts of different animals, and the idea of the Internet of Animals, which is quite an interesting concept. That's just reading a book about it at the moment. Technology allows us to have a really interesting window into the world to give us a different perspective, but not replacing, I don't think.
I think in that scenario, what I understand from your use case is it's going to allow for scale. So it's going to allow for more people to get qualified, and more people will want to get qualified because they feel more comfortable, assuming it's successful. And you still need that one assessor would have been doing the job. So that sounds cool. So we're getting towards the end, but I can't let you go as a technologist without giving me your finger in the air to go, right, where are things going? Because that's pretty much where we are now, even with the AI comment. So where do you think it could go? What gets you excited for the future of technology within this space?
So I think that idea of allowing us a different window into the natural world is really interesting. And I think that does relate to the idea of understanding how things move through the landscape. And some really interesting stuff, GPS tags, global positioning systems, knowing where things are on the surface of the Earth. That technology is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and therefore applicable to many different sorts of animals. I understand that even dragonflies now can be tracked using GPS tags. Absolutely amazing. And interestingly, I think we're moving to a space where we can look at lots of different animals at the same time, and we can begin to understand the interactions between them. So, if I went 20 years into the future, as you're suggesting, in some scenarios, we may be able to look at how the dragonfly, the butterfly, the grasshopper, the stonechat, the kestrel interact simultaneously. That could be there. We might be able to teach an AI to describe to us how that's all happening in a virtual environment, and therefore what it might look like if we did this and that and the other to the environment, if we had a lot more nature recovery. It's really interesting. I think while that's all very exciting, I go back perhaps to the point earlier that sometimes this technology can lead us away to the point that Chloe was making, which is that very personal interaction with nature. Heaven forbid we ever move away entirely from that. Heaven forbid we ever actually think that we can create the natural world on a screen big enough to be a window, so we don't have to look out the window at the natural world because we've got it on a screen that's representing it. I think those things do exist, but it's very worrying. At the end of the day, we need to get dirty hands. We need to feel the rain on our cheeks. We need to understand the power of nature. We need to understand what a windy day's like. We need to understand the cycles of nature. We need to understand when it's autumn, and that's the time of rest and renewal. We understand what springtime is like. And so all that kind of stuff. And we need to involve many, many more people in that. There's a danger here. We are constantly talking in an echo chamber with people of similar mind. We've got to push out beyond that. If there's a way that technology can help us do that, then that's great. And I think that's where we should really focus. Perhaps for the future, how is technology going to allow us to spread the word around the importance of connection with nature for everybody? Democratization of nature through technology. I don't know. I'm speculating.
I like that
view.
That, I think, brings it very nicely to close off this chat. So, Simon, thank you very much for your time. A lot of the things we've discussed will all be in the show notes. Obviously, links to websites, links to products, apps, etc. will also all be in the show notes. And any comments, queries, reflections on that from the listeners, please do get in touch. Again, all our emails will be in the show notes. Chloe, anything from you?
No, just thank you very much for your time, Simon. A really interesting conversation that went in directions I wasn't entirely expecting. So thanks for that.
Okay, the great thing about technology is it takes you in all sorts of different directions. But it's at the end of it, it's nature's the most important thing. Got to keep that front and centre. But thank you ever so much for having it. It's been an absolute pleasure.
That didn't quite go the direction I thought it was going to go. I thought we were going to get that deep dive tech geek nerdery, and I think I'm grateful that it didn't, and I think that we got some really quite insightful discussions around probably far more interesting topics to far more people. And clearly I enjoyed, as I do with many of our guests, the passion and knowledge of people that we get on.
I think it was a really good balance. And I'm delighted that we managed to get a healthy discussion about the role of people rather than diving into the world of software.
Missing out.
And I think the thing that was interesting to me is what it comes down to, I think, at the end of the day, is about how we have a relationship with technology that is beneficial to us and to nature. And that isn't always an easy thing to do. Like, how do you manage how much you use your phone when you're out on a walk? How do you manage how much technology supplements or supports human expertise? And it feels like it's something we're going to have to be constantly reviewing, both as at a societal level as well as at an individual level.
It's that slant in society currently, and maybe it's always been like this, and obviously we're only seeing it through our lifetime, but for people expecting and wanting things to be binary, either a yes or a no, a work or a fail or whatever, when actually life is anything but that. So it's about trying things out that maybe you're not so sure is going to be successful, but let's give it a go because we're going to learn something. Or like you say, there's no point saying I'm never going to take my phone with me on a walk, and vice versa. It's probably not healthy to say you should always take your phone on a walk. So it's just about being comfortable, being uncomfortable, or being unclear and finding that balance. And I think like we're learning as we go through life, because we talk about it quite a lot, don't we, that everything changes. So the way you expect things to be when you're 20, just the reality of life changes, and you've got to be flexible, because if you stay rigid on your expectations when you're 20 years old, invariably you're going to be frustrated, really.
I've been reading and listening to some podcasts recently about AI and low-tech lifestyles, and it would be easy to kind of get caught up in that binary position of the only way to exist in the climate and ecological crisis is without a mobile phone, without touching AI, because of, for those that don't know, it takes up a lot of energy. So there's a lot of concerns about how that might be impacting on our carbon footprint, depending on the source of the energy, etc. But ultimately, I think we can't work towards a place where none of those things are part of our lives. It's about how do we ensure that they are working in harmony for benefit to us and the planet.
Again, the answer is never binary. So for some people who may get frustrated with the way the world is and find it hard to cope, then actually maybe going for more of a low-tech lifestyle, it would be appropriate. I think it's just about learning about yourself and knowing what works for you and your life goals, and then applying the solutions that work for you and trying out different things, I think. Because again, for us, you and I love the idea of a low-tech lifestyle, but because we want to try and influence beyond our 80 acres with this project, we have to embrace social media. We have to embrace the podcasting, which we obviously enjoy doing anyway, because we really want to try and make sure we're doing everything we can for our future generations. So it's about understanding you. And I think there's no right or wrong, and people shouldn't judge each other based on what they see other people doing. It's just learn about yourself and find the right balance for you.
I suppose in that, notice your hypocrisy in the actions that you're taking. Like, I find ChatGPT useful. I'm also aware that it has huge energy demands, and we're working hard here to think about how do we reduce our energy. So it's a tension, isn't it? It's about being thoughtful and conscious of your actions.
100%. If anyone wants to contribute to this discussion, or we're always looking for good guests, if people want to recommend guests they'd like to get on the show, then please do send an email to hello@grangeproject.co.uk. And don't forget, next episode is going to be our detailed deep dive, insert AI colloquialism there, into the Grange Project, where we're at. And I think people will find it interesting. We'll try and be as honest as we possibly can in terms of the challenges we've faced, and also some real positive things that have come out of it.
Yeah, there's so much to look forward to.
Right. Until then.
Goodbye, everyone.